And first of all, is there any comments or reflections? I think I did ask you to try and be aware of different afflictive emotions as they arose through the week, so you become familiar with them. It's not enough really for us just to have these intellect. I mean, the whole purpose of the class or of teaching this kind of content is for us to be able to become familiar with the different emotions. It's just one way, it's just one model, actually. To be honest with you, it's just a model. And there are other models in Buddhism in which to subdue the mind. And in this model, or in this model, well, in the presentation of the afflictions and all these mental factors, it's really about becoming more familiar with your mind. So it's really possible that we get engaged in meditation, even as Buddhists, and we might meditate. Our style or proclivity might be more around kind of a mindfulness or awareness, bare aware, kind of awareness practice, concentration practice, focus practice, calm abiding, or we may have proclivity for developing some of the compassion practices around thought transformation, lojong. Um, you know, so it's not that it definitely is not one size fits all. But I think with any of the practices in throughout Buddhism, it's helpful to understand not just and I see this quite a bit with my Buddhist friends, maybe you know other traditions. They really don't focus so much on kind, well, they have it, they teach it. And of course, but sometimes it's not, maybe it's more, maybe a little bit in the background, and it can be for us as well. And so, what the real intent behind this is when you go into retreat or when you go into your meditation session, you have a more detailed blueprint of the mind and what's going on. And I do see that people with Buddhist friends, from who have less education or haven't done these sets of teachings, even in our tradition, um, they would benefit by just having an overall general sense that the mind is not, the mind that we're working with, what it means to work with the mind or subdue the mind. I think it's helpful to have the details of what it means to not have a subdued mind. It doesn't necessarily mean that one style is to focus overly on the unsubdued mind. That depends on one's personality. But when you're doing a meditation session in practice, it's important, especially when we get into more advanced meditation practice, that it's very possible that what we think we're meditating on is actually, we think we're meditating on something correctly, it's not correct. And this is a very big um, motivator for studying. Okay. And particularly if you think about, it may not be for us, but you think about if you're going to go into some kind of long retreat, you're not going to have your Lama there, probably. You could be good if he or she was around, but you're going to have to rely upon your education. And this is what we talk about in terms of developing the power of listening and the power of contemplation and the power of meditation. So a lot of us, Western people in particular, are really sort of want to kind of bypass the uh, education or the listening aspect, and even maybe the contemplating, but just go straight into meditation. And it's like it's not as a right or wrong, but the challenge there or the obstacle that comes up is if we're just focusing on meditation, how do we know we're doing it right? Right? Now, of course, if you have your meditation teacher there, or your teacher there, then you go and check with them. And that's a very traditional, customary way to do it. That when, kind of older times, the availability of meditation masters would be available to us. Now it's a little tricky. And actually, I think that if people are serious about doing retreat, it really is important to have at least some sort of support system and someone that you can check in with. Um, I mean, sometimes in retreat we don't check in because we're doing a very solitary retreat, But I think anytime you're in a solitary retreat or in your meditation practice, the job of the teacher is to help guide you. Um, yeah. So what did you find this week? Were you able to get a sense of what I'm thinking of is as we go through our life, through our day, as we go to work, as we go to school, as we go to with our family, as we go shopping, go to the market, go get our coffee, is start turning the awareness inward, even for a few minutes. So if you're standing in line for coffee, usually we're looking around, what kind of snacks are there? Do I know anyone in here? Or, why is it taking so long? you know, but the practice here that we're talking about is just there's just shifting the view. Doesn't mean you don't look around and all those kinds of things. But I believe I mentioned that the term for meditation translated, it means to become familiar. So that's why we meditate everywhere. Because are we really familiar? Familiar with what? It's really about being familiar with our minds. Okay? Our minds, our emotions, our thoughts, how we make sense of the world. So when we're in line at wherever, the airport or the coffee place, restaurant, um, what we ideally should start to do is start becoming familiar with my mind that's waiting for coffee. And it's not, and the trick with the advantage of developing a meditation practice on your cushion, say in the morning, is that when you're in the line at the coffee place, you've rehearsed. I mean, you have something to fall back on. So the purpose of meditation in the morning, whatever it is not to just feel good. And that's what most of us are in it for. Okay. It's a practice. What does it mean? Practice what? It's a practice training the mind, but the mind doesn't need as much training on our meditation cushion as it does in the world. I mean, if we have to do a lot of training on the meditation cushion. I don't mean it that way. But somehow the ability to become aware and focused on the meditation cushion is a much easier vehicle or context than become aware and focused in the line at the coffee place. Does that make sense? Or driving around. And all of a sudden, a lot of us just catch ourselves and we go, oh, yeah, I could have been checking in with myself during this time. But I just realized since I got in the car till now, 15 minutes later, I never even had the thought. I just put the music on or the news or whatever. So do people find that you more and more can begin to approach your daily life, even if it's it can be just a few moments through your day where you just shift? And now, we would look at different practices, and different people will say, let's say you're, I don't know, just struggling with your anger, and then so there's different modal and different methods. So people might say, well, just breathe when you find yourself like getting agitated in the line. Just breathe. Watch the breath, right? It's very fascinating. You can tell people's philosophy by listening to what their intervention is for you or for themselves. Um, of course, we here have many, 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 many different kinds of interventions. So if we're just going to go to the breath, I mean, that's better than nothing. It's better than what we used to do. But it's not transformative, generally speaking. Does that make sense? Buddhism, particularly Mahayana Buddhism in particular, and specifically Vajrayana, the practice of Tantra, is really about transformation. So practices can become more and more profound and deep as they deconstruct our world, and because it has to be sort of deconstructed first before we can reconstruct it into um, a transformative experience. Does that make sense? Yeah. And if we look at science in terms of how embedded we are in our way of making sense of the world, and looking at neuroscience, for example, and the neural pathways that are formed, and they're formed throughout our life. It's one of the interesting things about neuroscience that they're very uh, fond of saying that, the brain has plasticity, which means it can continue to grow and change until we die. That was not the model, I think, the common knowledge, some years ago. Excuse me. That most brain development happened up to the age of 18 or 21 or 6 years old or whatever it is that people's different theories were. And now we know it's not true. That if that were true, then you could not attain enlightenment in this lifetime, or you could not attain high realizations in this lifetime. You couldn't attain anything because the brain would be seen as the organ of the mind, and it would be seen as having been completely formed, right? Okay, so that's the argument for meditation. The argument meditation, when it's done properly, is rewiring the brain. So the antidotes to the afflictions. Now, it's a luxury now. We can talk about antidotes to the afflictions because we've talked about the afflictions. But you can't really talk about, well, you can, but it's not as impactful to talk about antidotes to the afflictions when we don't have really good grasp on afflictions. It's just so funny. You have these experiences with people, and you'd say, well, uh, the guy cut in line right in front of me. I've been waiting 15 minutes and he just came out of nowhere and cut in line. And, I was just irritated with him. People say things like, oh, well, you have a right to be irritated. Yeah, that's just not common courtesy. So those kinds of taglines are very common in our culture, aren't they? As you come out from the supermarket and you see your car is dinged and no one's left you a message and you get really pissed off about it and people say, well, you have a right to be, right? So they're not recognized. Now, why is it important to recognize that we have afflictions? Why is that even important? And someone can answer that. It's a real question. Why does it even matter?
I
Why
would
are we
say
talking?
oh, so
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, no, it's my.
No, it's turning from the external as causation and realizing it's the internal happenings that's causing the samsara or the pain. They're not making me happy. They're not making me mad. I'm making myself mad. Shortcutting it, but ultimately that's, I think, the right answer.
Yeah, yeah. Don't you think that you can keep your mic off on for a minute? Don't you think that don't you think that what you said that for some people, or even for us initially is like, well, great, now what do I do? I'm the fault of everything, right? I'm at fault. Do people go there or is it they kind of get it?
I, I, personally, I think for a long time I thought it was my fault.
Mhm.
Now I realize it just keeps changing. One moment it is my fault, it isn't my fault, and realizing it's not coming from external. Does that make sense? I can kind
Yeah,
of see, wait a minute, there'll be another thought, there'll be another one, another emotion.
right. So I have a
And,
so the question is that in this process, and I've seen this happen to all of us, myself, everybody, when we start to become familiar with the idea that there are afflictions and that our reality is created mostly internally, what is the thing that keeps, well, sometimes people get feeling very despondent and very self-critical, which if you meet Tibetans, they don't have that. I mean, I'm generalizing, but they don't have that thing. Or guilty, right? His Holiness was, and Lama Yeshe said the same thing, that they were sort of taken aback when they were started teaching in the West and the concept of guilt. There's no word in Tibetan for guilt, not the kind we mean.
mhm,
I think it's fascinating. But we go there pretty quickly, don't we? And again, I'm generalizing, but that's sort of a cultural practice or belief, isn't it? How
yeah,
do we avoid
you're
that?
right.
How do we avoid that? How do we avoid the self-criticism, the self-hatred, the self, the low self-esteem, which is another word they don't have in Tibetan, by the way. They didn't understand. I had to, not I, but they, for His Holiness and Lama Yeshe and many other lamas, that word self-esteem, low self-esteem, was used a lot and still is used, but used a lot earlier, a couple decades ago. And they didn't understand what that meant. Low self-esteem. You know, Low self-esteem really is sort of self-hatred. So it's still a hatred, isn't it? I
Hmm.
mean, again, generalizing. I hope it's okay to generalize because sometimes we can only make sense of these terms and these words and these concepts by generalizing. But I hope you know that I know there's exceptions to all of these, you know, and I know it's more nuanced than just, but I think to make a point, you know, we become very self-critical and then I've had a number of Dharma students, see or would want to talk because they would get, including myself, by the way, depressed. When you start seeing your mind, yes, it has amazing beauty. It has, the most exalted qualities that exist. And I think we all have glimpses of that or touches that, or else we wouldn't keep doing this, or the potential for it. But those qualities seem to be harder to access, right, in the beginning than the qualities of the afflictions, right? Are you with me? Everyone with me? Any questions? Yeah. Any comments? Okay. Okay. So the one, so what I was thinking tonight is kind of, we'll see how far we get. But I did start capturing some of the antidotes or interventions that we might use against these afflictions. I wasn't able to get very far enough for tonight. But I want to know if I can just, I want to know if I can just have your interest or patience to finish our last affliction. Because actually, we can't do much without that one. The affliction of ignorance. Okay, and it's as you know, I think all of you know, volumes and volumes and volumes of books are written, Buddhist books are written on about ignorance, and ignorance is opposite, we could say, which is wisdom. So it is it is precise. The understanding of ignorance, even more precise is the understanding of its opposite, wisdom. I like to go through it, but I'd also like to go through it in a way that you can pause me to clarify if it's because there's no way to do this but to do it right. Okay? And if you do it right, or if I do it right, then if I assume people have heard these ideas and now some might hear them for the first time, some might hear them for the 10th time. Once you get the idea, that's all I really want right now, because it's so profound that you really can't progress along this spiritual path without understanding ignorance. Why? Because without understanding ignorance, one cannot understand reality. The flip side of ignorance in our conversation tonight, the flip side of ignorance is the nature of reality. Okay? So the very, very, not just the cornerstone, but the whole foundation of real Buddhist practice. I'm talking about real meaning the practice of attaining awakening. Okay? Cannot be pursued without an understanding of ignorance and its flip side, without understanding the essential or the necessity of pursuing insight into reality. No way. So if you were going to do one practice and only one practice, it would be this one, developing insight into reality. Now we could say, well, and they say that all the 84,000 teachings the Buddha gave were for the sole purpose of revealing or understanding reality. That's how important it is. So when we talk about developing compassion, which we love, the idea, you know, the whole practice, or we're talking about understanding karma, or sort of talking about understanding dependent arising, or understanding the perfect human rebirth, or understanding refuge, or all these this, countless teachings, 84,000. Can you believe that they're all for the single purpose of understanding reality? So why didn't Buddha just give, the teachings on reality? Why didn't he? Anyone want to guess? Or not guess, but to say something?
Because nobody
Because
would
people had
understand it.
No one could understand it. That's one. And then
Yeah.
someone else was saying something?
people were at different stages, different mindsets,
Yeah,
so different teachings for different
right.
abilities.
It's exactly right. Both are right. It's because, yes, exactly what Jerry said, right, Jerry? Yeah. Um, you, a person's path or approach to reality, understand reality. Everyone, if we were to kind of be simplistic about it, Buddha sits around and looks at every living being, and all he wants is for them to understand the nature of reality. But then also he looks around and sees what our personality is like, right? What our capabilities are. And that's the skill of that's the wisdom of a skilled teacher. Okay. They will know what is right for us, but not right for us if they're really wise. Not right for us just because it feels good, or feels easy, or feels like I got to work on that, or I got to work on this. In a temporary sense. They're working with us if they're working with us because that's the quickest way to get Karuna to understand reality. Is for him to go work in a monastery, or him to go work in an organization. I really firmly believe that. Only a skilled teacher. The reason that each of us are doing different things, or if we're under the guidance of a teacher, and we don't all get the same instruction, do we? Life instruction or the same practice, because we're each individuals, and we have our past countless karma that forms into the personality we are today. There's a story of when there was one king who was a student, disciple of the Buddha, and he killed. God, I'm messing this up. No, his son, the prince, killed his father, the king, and then fell into a deep depression and was suicidal for doing that. Had regret. And the Buddha said, "It's okay. It's good to kill your father." I think he killed father and mother. But anyway, the point was that, and of course, they give context to it, which was the Buddha went on to explain, well, it's good to kill your father, which is the real father that you need to kill is your attachment. I think I got the story right, but the point of the story is that depending on the person, we can't, I can't say what's best for them. It's very hard to make that judgment. So I remember telling you guys that as a young student, I met Lama Yeshe when I was 21, and he passed away in 1984, and then I was 30. So I'd been with him 9 years. I wanted to become a monk. I wanted to become a translator because I spoke Nepalese and Tibetan was coming to me. I wanted to do lots of retreats. I wanted to be like a scholar. And every one of those things individually, not at once, over some years, he told me not to do. He told me once, I told him I was learning Tibetan. He said, I don't want you to become a translator. Okay, why? Oh, he said, my students who become translators, this is long ago, I don't think it's true necessarily today, their practice weakens and diminishes because they're paying too much attention to the language. learning Tibetan. And also, I think there's some pride that goes with it. I'm a translator, like that kind of thing. And then to become a monk, one day I was often I would do his letters with him when he was at Kopan. And there were two different Western students, both of them who I knew, who wanted to become ordained. One was a monk and one wanted to become a nun. And both of them were having trouble because Lam Yeshe, for those two individuals, had said, well, I'll ordain you if you get your parents' permission. And they couldn't get their permission. Actually, the nun eventually did get the permission, and she's still a nun today, as after what, 40, 50 years. But the other guy, no, and you could see why. He wasn't really monk material. It was more sort of a whim of his or, early, anyway, whatever, I don't know. But it didn't work out. Um, so when I wanted to become a monk, he said, no, I don't want you to become a monk. That's very strange, because most Tibetan or in the Tibetan tradition, Buddhist masters are sort of told to encourage, I think it's part of their vows, to encourage people to become ordained. Um, and then, I would want to go to teachings, different teachings with His Holiness or different retreats. And Lam kept saying, and his mantra for me was, no, you work. Okay. And I think I've mentioned I didn't like work. I want to do those other things. And he told me to get married, and I married my present wife back in Kopan. He said he set us up. It was like an arranged marriage, you could say. So, point is that we are all individual, right? And individually, we have the same path, but we don't have the same applications and the same timing. Okay? I want to hope that, my point here is to encourage you to really also trust your wisdom as you unfold these, read, study, contemplate, meditate, and trust. Okay, you have to be very quietly trust, not sort of some people say, they get a strong feeling, oh, I knew I should do this. I just got a feeling. That's not quite what I mean. That can happen. Definitely can. But if you get that kind of situation, you need to also check up in terms of does it make sense? Does it make sense from a Dharma point of view? Okay, now I'm going off track. Any comments to anybody? I went off on a whole, as my wife says, a whole rave. Do we say that here? She's Australian, and Jay, would you say that? You went off on a
Well,
rave.
I'm bilingual,
Yeah.
Australian, and so it's hard for me to remember which is which, quite frankly.
Are you bilingual and what?
Australian and US English.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm bilingual, but I think I'm more American. Yeah, for sure. I had
Yeah.
to. Anyone else? Is
I'm
there
in
any?
Very,
Australia. I'm in Australia as well.
I thought I recognized your accent as Australian. Where in Australia are you?
Well, I have an Irish accent.
Oh, no, all Australians have Irish accents. There
No,
isn't
no, they
one.
don't.
No, I'm joking. Where do you
Once upon
live?
a time, once upon a time, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, where do I live? North of Sydney, Central Coast.
Oh, okay. It's in
But
Vagiana Center. Do you
that's
go
in
to
Ashfield.
Vagiana?
It's about an hour and a half away. Yes, I
Oh,
do
you're
go there.
down. Oh, I see. Are you south
I'm
or
in the
north?
central north of Sydney.
Oh, okay.
It's
How
about an hour and a
far?
half to Ashfield from here.
Oh, okay. How far is it to? Well, you're quite a way. How far are you to the Queensland border?
Uh, many hours drive.
Many
It's
hours. Okay, far.
it's probably 1,000 kilometers to Brisbane.
Yeah. Oh, that's far. Yeah. Um. Yeah, I did that drive from Melbourne to Brisbane once. It took
Mm,
forever.
that's a long drive.
That was way back long ago. Okay, so do people have any interest to know what ignorance is? Would that be helpful, or is it I'm gonna bore you? More information,
I have a related question, which
please.
may take us totally in the wrong direction, which is now my understanding is that various things arise. This is a quote: various things arise from the mind,
Hmm.
and they appear to be beings outwardly, and yet this world is just the mind, right?
Right.
Is that
Okay.
accurate?
So it's not inaccurate. Okay, this is a really good opportunity when because we're going to start talking about the nature of reality. Well, sometimes referred to as emptiness of inherent existence. But that's emptiness of inherent existence in a way is the definition of reality. And we won't get too technical right now. So when Buddha taught the nature of reality, over time, there were four different philosophical schools that were formed as a natural way of explaining the nature of reality, the nature of the self, the nature of phenomena. Basically comes down to just the nature of phenomena and the nature of the self. Okay? That's mostly so one school will say reality is that this is what the Buddha meant. This is how I'm interpreting it. Another school will say, well, we interpret it this way. And what you find, Jay, is that there's four philosophical schools. Two of the schools lend themselves to the Mahayana tradition, and two of the schools lend themselves more to the Southern tradition or the fundamentalist tradition. So these four schools are also their level of subtlety of understanding and explaining the nature of reality ascends from the more basic, and the basic is a not fair term, but more basic up to the most subtle. Okay? So these four schools, the third highest school is what's referred to as the Chittamatran or the mind only school. And it is a Mahayana school, which means that there are certain Mahayana traditions that subscribe to that school, the Chittaman mind only school's articulation of reality as the highest. Uh, but when the school above that, or the traditional school above that, is referred to as the Madhyamika. Okay. And the Madhyamika, I'll explain this. I'll say it one way, it sounds a little provocative. The Madhyamika is the most profound, exact articulation or description of the nature of reality. And it is only the Madhyamika view, the way they explain the view, that leads to enlightenment, not the other three. The other three lead eventually to a deep understanding as the Madhyamikans might express it. Now, I'm the Gelug school is as a Madhyamika as a tradition in Tibet, is a Madhyamika school. I think we could say all four traditions. But to be fair, Zen is a Mahayana school. However, their philosophical foundation is mind only. So this is quite a debate and the schools debate amongst themselves to say, to prove and disprove to prove their own position and disprove the others.
So
And
here's my
yeah,
real question.
yeah.
How do we avoid solipsism? Like the only thing that I am aware of is my mind and what's in my mind. Nothing exists externally. Now I know that I think it's with the Gelug we would say no, there's conventional reality. What
Hmm.
is the difference between conventional reality and the reality that I'm currently imposing or
Okay,
thinking I'm involved in?
that's good. So we won't go into too deeply because it's a very deep question. It's not like an answer. There's a direction to give the answer. And it is to study those, not, I'd say this cautiously, it's to study though the explanation of conventional reality and absolute reality. So what you're bringing in is absolute reality. Yeah, absolute truth, absolute reality. And conventional reality, we don't impose an absolute view on conventional. Does that make sense? Otherwise, that's that thing like, oh, I can hit you in the face because you don't really exist, right? That's a mixing two views. Okay. Conventionally, people exist. How they exist, that's the whole debate. That's what we study. Okay, they exist this way, they exist that way. The four schools are going to define how people exist conventionally differently. In the Chittamatran, I don't want to go too into it because I can't claim to be an expert, but in the Chittamatran, they will say the conventional world, the conventional reality is nothing but mind. Yes, that's how I understand it. Madhyamika does not say that.
So
I don't know if
briefly, can you say what it is
what
then?
conventional reality is.
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah. Conventional reality is that things exist. I'll tell you, yeah, okay, I'll answer and then we'll go to the ignorant slides. Okay, how about that? The short is conventional reality. Okay, it exists, but we see it in an erroneous way. Okay, so another way of
Okay.
saying it, another
Yeah.
way of saying it, that person walking down the street exists validly,
Yeah.
but
But not how
erroneously.
I see them.
But we see them wrongly.
Yeah. 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 Okay.
When
I
you
hope.
when we see things rightly, how do you like that language? When we see things rightly, that person doesn't cease to exist, okay? Or that cup or the TV. When we see reality, that TV doesn't cease to exist, but the way we perceive it and experience it does cease to exist. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Okay, now how would it exist? That might be your next question, but I think you're being polite and not asking that. Were you?
I would love to know the answer to that, but I think that takes us down a whole different path, which
That
you,
takes us to our slides in a second. So the way it
oh, does
exists,
it? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
the way it exists for the Madhyamika, the highest school, is it exists as a dependent arising or a dependent entity. Everything is dependent on something else. If something is dependent, it cannot exist independently, right? When we begin to, let's start our slides, but one of the misviews that ignorance gets us to see is we see things existing independently on their own. And that person walking down the street, this takes meditation and study, by the way. It takes study first and contemplate. Everything we see as it existing independently, and that's false. The Buddha, or the person who's realized reality or emptiness, sees things as arising dependently. To get there, we have to spend a lot of time meditating on how we do see the world. Okay? And we'll go into that now a little bit. Is that okay? Did I do okay? Is that helpful?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Uh, okay. Okay. So all these afflictions, so let's put it in context as well. All these afflictions arise. Uh, there's only one diagnosis in Buddhist. Sorry, I'm trying to move. Hang on a second. There's only. Why isn't this moving? Yeah. There's only one diagnosis in Buddhist psychopathology. Okay. There's only one diagnosis. Whereas in Western, psychology, modern psychology, we have 273 different diagnoses. Okay. So the main culprit is this is what Geshe Gelek says in Kadampa Center, North Carolina. I love this quote. And again, this might answer a little bit, elaborate on what I explained to Jay about what is conventional. We see what is not there, okay? And we do not see what is there. That's the whole point, okay? And when we engage with the world and we engage with each other, we're engaging with something that's not there. And not engaging, this is so important, with what is there. Lama should say we're hallucinating. I want to, just to be, it's good to be clear. An hallucination doesn't exist at all, except for when you see. So it's not actually that we're hallucinating, but Lama used the word, uh, technically we're not hallucinating. So if we're, if we take psychedelics and we're hallucinating, you know, snakes on the floor, okay? Those snakes do not exist in the way the floor does. Okay, the floor is not being hallucinated in that way because the hallucination of the snake is they don't exist as snakes at all, right? They don't exist at all. Their only conventional reality is they're made up in my mind. Okay, but the floor is not totally made up in my mind or the cupboard or whatever you want to talk about. Does that make sense? But it is like a hallucination. Where the way we see everything and experience the world is like an hallucination. Okay. I'm sure you've seen these sidewalk drawings, right? Paintings. This is like our world. They look 3D, but it's not. There's no cement block there, by the way. You know that, right? Yeah. But this, even the photographer's tricking us because he's got taking a photo of people walking around it. But they're just walking around the drawing on the sidewalk. That at only at a certain angle does it look like this. I don't know if you've ever seen that what they look like from the side and all that. It's very different. But this is how we go through our world. Very similar. So this is a definition because we're into definitions. Um, an afflicted state of unknowing. We just start with that. Unknowing. Brought about by the mind being unclear. Okay. So the mind's obscured. The mind is not clear. I mean, the mind ultimately is clear. I don't mean that. I mean, but our functioning mind, the way we go through the world, is unclear about the nature of such things as the law of cause and effect, the three jewels, and so on. So those are conventional reality, like dependent arising, I was explaining a few minutes ago. We're unclear about those. We don't see them even. And those are conventional realities. It has the function of acting as a basis and a root for all other afflictions, as well as the defiled actions and states of birth that they produce. So it's the ultimate antidote to anger. Okay, when we get advanced enough, the the more advanced practitioner is going to engage in eliminating, subduing anger through the practice of wisdom. And maybe not only, but and the practice of compassion becomes the practice of the meditator, the yogi, or the practitioner when he or she sees the world through the lens of wisdom. The natural reaction is an uncontrived, what's the word? Conceptual, non-conceptual, non-conceptual, uncontrived compassion. We're, at least I am, you know, I have to practice compassion. Now that practice of compassion, sad to say, is not really compassion. It's better, but real compassion at the level of spontaneity, is not contrived. Compassion for these beings is not something, any more than a mother has to contrive having a sense of hurt or compassion for her child who might be struggling at school or being picked on or getting close to dangerous traffic, whatever. Do you know what I mean? Again, not to split hairs, just that instinctual. She doesn't have to be told, have compassion for your child, and tell him that he'll be better at school in the future, or school doesn't really matter. Of course, we have those things, but we're not talking about that. Okay. Now, that compassion is different than the compassion generated through wisdom, because a compassion generated through wisdom has no ego involved. Because, of course, we're going to have ego involved, and we have biases towards our own child, and and anti-bias again, or the other bias against other children, hurting him. But a person who really is practicing compassion from the viewpoint of wisdom, or from the companionship of wisdom, doesn't have that bias. That person has the same compassion for his child as he does for another child. Okay? But that's because of the wisdom part. Generally, there are two types of ignorance. Okay? This is important, and this is going back to Jay's question in a way, is there's confusion about ultimate reality. Okay, that first one is about ultimate reality, which is the reality, the meaning of reality itself, and that applies to the nature of the self or the identity. Now, this self, we can also apply it. This is a self, our identity, right? Our me, our I. We don't understand. So the ignorance is we conceive this I, this self, as different than it really exists. So all of us here have a sense of I all the time. So when we're walking, like if you're just sitting here right now, we have a sense of I'm sitting here, right? And if someone were to ask, oh, which no one has ever asked us, of course, that I, oh, I'm sitting here. What is that I? What is that self? Okay. So those four philosophical schools will answer that differently. And not only that, then we have the Vedanta and Brahmanical schools of Hinduism that also describes the nature of the self. We could even go as far as Christianity talks about a self, as a soul. They're all trying to explain what our identity is. And, I'm different than you, right? You're not sitting here. I'm sitting here talking to you. You're listening. What is that thing that's sitting here and not sitting where you are? And what is that thing that's sitting where you are and not sitting where I am? How do you define that? Okay. And so that's the confusion about the nature of reality of the self. And the same applies, and this is good to hear early on if you haven't heard this before. There's only two things that we confuse the nature of how they exist. One's identity or self, and everything else. That makes sense. So that sounds like gazillions of things, but it's not actually in that sense. So everything external or everything separate from my identity, self, is the self of phenomena. So when we look at a cup, we see a self there, but I'm not talking about, of course, the self that's described there is like its identity, not a conscious self. I don't mean it in that way. So a cup has an identity that we project. You know, the floor has identity that we project. Your cabinets have an identity that we project on. Your car, our car, okay, the planets, the trees, the rivers, the ocean, all of the people. Those are all, this is not technically correct, but those are all external to oneself. Okay? And those we see a self in those as well. That's my point. But we don't see like a conscious self. It's not that we see an identity. The cup has an identity of its own. It's kind of like the red cup and the blue cup. What makes the red cup a red cup and the blue cup a blue cup? Because they have separate entities, separate identities, separate selves. Does that make sense? Because this is a really important one because we see everything as having a self, and it does have some sense of, identity, but we see all the selves we see, both our own internal personal sense of self and external. We see all those incorrectly. We see their identity incorrectly. Okay, we're going to get into that. And we touched on it a little bit a while ago. Any questions? Huh?
Yeah, I sort of have.
Sure.
So my understanding, because I've heard this, you know, over the years, on
Sure.
and off,
Sure.
and I used to always think, so what's the point? And I suppose what I understand now is the point of it is if we saw everything the way it really existed, we actually wouldn't have all of those delusions of anger and
Correct.
all the other.
That's
Is that correct?
that's
Yes.
exactly the point. I would put it, yeah, we wouldn't. You're exactly right. I'll just elaborate on just one thing. Not only before we don't have them, we would respond differently. So let's say I have a lot of anger towards certain politicians in my country right now. Okay. And so the more I engage or cultivate this idea that that what I'm seeing, I believe, is their true self, so to speak. And as I get more, so that the way I see them as evil, selfish, greedy, right? And I believe that's who they are, right? I mean that's pretty simple. Then that activates the anger, right? The anger, let's just say anger, or that affliction in me, correct? When you begin to see reality and you see that's not who they are, right? In fact, one thing is you might see who they are, but at the same time, you see who they're not, and that's my projection. It's like all of a sudden, oh, wow, I'm projecting greed, evil, all those things onto an entity that doesn't even exist that way. So not only does it not exist that way, right? The entity, the self, it also doesn't have those qualities. It can't. Now,
Cannot.
it cannot. And
Why?
it cannot have them inherently. That's the key word here. Of course, they're showing up greedy, right? Of course, they're showing up greedy. And there's a pretty common term used in Tibetan debate, which is he has anger, but he's not angry. And that's because this understanding of the self, okay? The understanding that self is misunderstood. Okay. So can you imagine, Jerry, when you begin to see things not existing the way they appear, like these certain politicians, they don't actually exist the way I'm seeing them because I begin to sense I'm projecting onto them. And by the way, I always say, yes, there's data, right? Data. Looking at a cup, there are molecules and there are atoms. They also don't truly exist, but they exist conventionally. And these politicians exist conventionally. And yes, they may be, greedy or angry or all these things. But we're using our ultimate view, right, to see how they really are in existence. And when we see them as they really are, as like a hallucination or ethereal or like a mist or like right? How do you apply anger to something that has changed instant to instant? And so therefore doesn't exist as a solid entity. I don't know how far we'll get tonight, but there's three things that we do with this. One of the things is we see things existing independently and outside us. That's one. Second thing is we see things as solid, monolithic. And this you have to just do in your meditation, and you'll see you do see things that way. The third thing is um, we see things as permanent or unchanging. So with Mr. Trump, for example. If he's a constant, if I saw him conventionally correctly and ultimately correctly, I would see that uh, he Trump is moving constantly. Remember I said last week, I think 253 imprints in the snap of a finger. That's how he's moving quicker than that. But then if I'm angry at him, I freeze him, don't I? He has to freeze. He has to freeze and solid. That's that thing about existing independently, monolithically, and permanently. Permanent means unchanging moment to moment. That's how I see him. And that allows me to get angry at him. But that's not how he exists. There's not one atom, not one atom in his body that's not changing moment to moment. Okay. But more profoundly, there's not one instance in his mind that's not changing moment to moment. So where do I place my hatred? It's like it's like a waterfall or a stream of water coming down a wall. Where do you play? You say it's beautiful. Well, where do you place the beauty? You have to freeze it to say it's beautiful. Otherwise, it's just moving data. It's just moving atoms and molecules. And then we make an interpretation. For me, I love it. It's beautiful. That's the afflictions. If I love it, then I'll sit back and enjoy the waterfall or the water coming down. Yeah, waterfall. And as soon as someone comes into the picture and they want to dive off the waterfall or whatever, then I get irritated because my attachment to what I see is pleasurable and that's being interrupted. Okay. Lama Yeshe used to tell me, others, he used to love good tea. He loved tea. I mean, good tea, different English teas and stuff like that. And he really loved good. When I say love, he admired fine china. So when he'd come traveling back from the West, he'd often bring a tea set. Now, the funny thing is, he'd always give it away eventually too, right? But I came into his room once and he looked at me and he said, "You don't even know how to make a cup of tea." Okay, what is me? That's the whole teaching of what we're talking about here. Of course, I knew how to make my kind of cup of tea, but he was making, and then he would take sips and he'd look so blissed out. Because he had a view of emptiness and reality, he could transform the tea. Tea doesn't want it's going to disappear, but now it was his because he was familiar with the hallucination. And once he was asked, uh, about Tantra, right? And Tantra has a lot to do with visualization, right? And visually deity practice and mantras and mandala practice. And the student once asked, um, this is all just make-believe stuff. And so you're just telling us to create a fantasy. How is it? Isn't this just a fantasy what you're trying to do? And you know what he said? Yes, it is a fantasy, but it's a better fantasy than the one you got. When we realize the emptiness of inherent existence or emptiness of permanency, independency, and monolithic quality, we have control. We can do anything. We can make anything, can't we? The reason we can't love our neighbor or love our enemy, I should say, is because we think the enemy is fixed permanently. It exists out there independently. With the enemy, politician, whoever you want to say, with the enemy, what part of that enemy exists in them? And what part of the enemy exists in me, in my view, my projection? I'm actually asking you, does anyone know? What do you think?
All of
Exists
it,
within.
does all of it exist in you or
Well,
in me?
that goes back to who asked about mind only. Jay. Was it Jay? That goes back. So I could answer that it all goes. Did you say it all goes back to me? Is that what you said? Or it all exists in me?
Oh, wasn't the question
Yeah.
where does the anger exist?
Yeah.
So
Where's
it's
where
if so if I'm angry at the president, the anger exists in my
right.
mind.
Right. So now the question, now the question comes, we go into the philosophical schools, and I ask you, so where does Trump exist? You don't have to answer.
Conventionally,
Conventionally, what does that mean?
well, conventionally, that Trump exists conventionally because you and I need to be able to talk about. If I say the president, you and I need to understand what we're talking about. So conventionally, he
Hmm.
exists, but ultimately, it's my feelings about the conventional person exist within my mind.
Well, this is where we go. We'll go back to the slides. So even conventionally, we don't understand conventional reality either. We say conventionally, which is correct. But what is that? It's just a word. What does it mean, conventional? You know what I mean? So so do we see conventional reality?
Not necessarily, because my conventional reality, Karen's conventional reality, and Jerry's are all three completely different because we
Complete.
all
Mhm.
have different experiences and thought processes or ideas of what
Right. So
conventional reality or the conventional reality.
okay, so we got to be careful to say completely different. This is what's interesting about conventional reality. It's a reality. So if they're completely different, uh, when you look at Trump, say, or whatever, or, a red car, and Jerry looks at a red car, and Karen looks at a red car, then Karen could say it's a hippopotamus. Jerry could say it's a roller coaster, and you could say it's a red car. But what we don't say that. Why? So is something existing outside of us as well?
We have
Well, we
We have what?
valid cognition.
Valid cognition determines conventional reality, but is it? Yeah, that's right, but it's erroneous too. So my point, Zayla, is that this is why we study the texts. Because if reality is completely made by us individually, we wouldn't have, it'd be very unlikely we'd have any agreements, right? That's a car, that's a roller coaster, and that's a boulder. But we don't.
isn't
We
that
all
what
say
labeling is about? That we agree on labels.
we agree on labels, and that is a big part of what it means conventional reality. We agree it's a car. It has
Yeah,
four wheels, don't we?
yeah, yeah.
So it's not all made up by our. Now, what if someone says, okay, that there's the four of us, or there's all of us, and some guy walks up to me, and we're all admiring this red car. We like it or we don't like it, whatever. We're looking at it. And some guy comes down and goes, "Hey, what do you think about the horse?"
Well,
Is
we just say, "Where's the horse?"
Yeah, but if everyone makes up their own reality, and that's the definition of reality, right? It doesn't work that way because we all agree.
We agree on the label.
We agree on the label. Isn't that funny? It's not. It's kind of pretty thin, isn't it? But
But
also,
isn't that what language is about? That's what how we understand each other because we agree on.
well, and that's what Cynthia was saying is that, valid cognition is still erroneous. But no one asked me why. Did anyone ask me why? Valid cognition says it's a red car. That valid cognition of the red car, though, is erroneous. And I just told you 5 minutes ago why. Think about back to Trump.
Because Trump changes from moment to moment. So we don't see Trump in that he is made of parts.
We don't. We do not. When he is, everything is. Well, you see the opposite, we actually see. Now we're talking about perception. Our perception, and this is something I want all of you, if you can, to meditate this week and just choose an object. You know, I don't care where you sit. You sit on your bed or whatever, or in a chair. I just want you to start beginning to get a sense that all objects and my sense of self are seeing as existing on its own, which means independently, is existing as something partless when it's not. None of these things are partless, but they appear monolithic, and they all seem to appear non-changing, which is what permanence is. And they're not. Why don't we see what they are? That's conventional reality, Karen, by the way. For those of you, that's part of what defines conventional reality. We don't even see conventional reality. Not, I mean, we see it, but we don't see it correctly. That's the part about that red car. It is validly a red car, but we see it erroneously because we don't see it as moving and made of parts and changing. And just because I got to do my job correctly, there is a more subtle view than that that's wrong also. And we're not talking about that yet. Just start with the permanent, monolithic, independent. But there are some deeper wrong views. Okay. Well, just one, which we'll get to. Is this helpful or not? I know I go into my head so much, don't I? It's because of the topic you've given me. Zayla, you have to get a hold of Venerable Dundrup. Tell him to have me teach like I don't know, compassion or something. I'll probably still make it all confusing.
Oh no, 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 no. This is fantastic because we're hitting stuff that I don't think
You haven't
we're
had this
going
yet.
deeper than we not in this
Good.
way.
Good.
Not
Good.
yes, we haven't seen it in this way. So yeah,
Okay.
keep going.
Okay.
Don't stop.
Okay.
And
Okay,
I've
let's
seen some of this described, but your
yes.
capacity to make it more real is excellent from my
Thank you.
point of view.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. That's
So
because
it is helpful.
that's from Lama Yeshe. Okay, so let's go back to here. I think that's the right slide. Okay, so we did this, and so this right here is diagrammed right here. Okay. Now, under actions and their effects, there can be other things there too. Okay. Okay. So ignorance here. Now, this is something I didn't learn for many years. So generally, we're talking about it's a non-knowledge. Like we don't know reality. We don't know that thing's impermanent. We don't know that thing's dependent. That kind of thing. But this ignorance that we're talking about goes further. It's not just non-knowledge. It also, so when it doesn't know that car is the correct nature of the car as being empty of those things, then it projects onto it as well. So it's a double whammy. This ignorance is a double function. First, it misconceives the nature of the entity. And second, it projects an entity on top of it that's incorrect. This applies to one's own ego or self, where we conceive ourselves as inherently existent. That's the new word. That's the deeper word that goes beyond those other three of independence, permanence, and partlessness. Is the deeper understanding of this is about talks about inherent existence. And I think others who have studied will validate. I have on my shelf, not shelf, where I read from, four different volumes on this topic sitting in front of me. Okay, and they're hundreds and hundreds of pages long. So what I'm giving you is I'm trying to distill those hundreds and hundreds of pages into a few lines. Okay, but that's good. That's the way it works. And then we get interested and we know, what did Karuna mean by inherent existence? I don't get that. And why is it deeper than partlessness and permanent permanence and independence? What is this thing? And in fact, inherent existence isn't a very common word anyway. What does it mean, and why is it different? This I, this comes back to our mistaken views from last week, where we project an I onto these five aggregates. We project an I or a sense of self onto my body, onto my feelings, onto my discriminations or discernments, onto all those other mental factors, and onto my consciousnesses. So generally we speaking, we project a sense of I onto our body and those afflictions and mental factors. So where we say, I'm really angry. I'm seething with anger. I'm shaking. I'm so angry. I can't sleep because I'm so scared. Fear is is an affliction, but we say I'm scared, right? So that's when we say when we think, even you think I'm in love with you, that love is still, now that can be a virtuous mind, but it's still a mental factor. It's still part of those five aggregates. So we merge with the love and we think I'm in love. Tibetan debaters would say I have love. And that doesn't necessarily change the ignorance of it, by the way, but it's a linguistic twist that can help to kind of begin to understand these things. I have anger, but we don't say that. We say I'm angry. And then it's kind of a bit of mm, a bit of a something that's a little bit, I don't want to say like a game, but it's dishonest because people will say, yeah, I have anger, but their anger is merged with their sense of self. That's the point. Okay, they identify that anger as them. Doesn't matter they change the word from I am to I have. Conventionally speaking, we are not anger, we do have anger. We're not attached, we have attachment. That is true. But that's not how we function, right? The advanced practitioner gets that. They do function that way. They do see it that way. And by the way, an advanced practitioner, they see it that way, but then those negative afflictions begin to dissolve and disappear because they have no one to hang on to them. Anger needs a subject and it needs an object. Anger without a subject doesn't exist. It's like, you make me so angry when you do that. I mean, your angry makes you so angry when they do that. So then the other thing is that phenomena outside of us is controlled by the I. Now that can mean controlled by me. I control the phenomena. Okay? That's what my I does. It wants to control outer things and it wants to control or be part of the internal world. Okay? So it's kind of a dual function. There's what we've talked about. It compels us to see things as unchanging when they are not. It compels us to see things as inherently well, I got to explain that one. Third one, compels us to see the world as satisfying when it is not. What this ignorance does, it gets us to see all kinds of things that they're not. The Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering. Well, this I or this ignorance gets us to see the world as very satisfying. Doesn't get us to see it as suffering or disappointing. That's why they're called the Four Noble Truths, because they're truths for someone who sees reality. Okay? Compels us to see the world as satisfying when it is not. Okay, all kinds of things come with that. So this ignorance gets us to see all countless things wrong. Okay. So what we do, and this is what I'm explaining most of this time, self, oneself, whoever you are, we see that person as existing independently of everyone else and everything else. Like they talk about it like a king and his subjects. We also see it as partless, monolithic entities. And this is external things as well. And as permanently existing, and here I didn't put it permanent, but I have the fourth one as inherently existing. So just to give um, so when we talk about inherent existence as the more subtle wrong view of ignorance, inherent existence just means well, it's not that just means it's a deep concept, but it means something that there has to be something there, right? There has to be something there. Hang on just a minute. I got it. How do I do this? Um, this inherent existence means inherently there's got to be something there, right? So according to the Madhyamika schools, you could see things as not independently existing and not and see them as having parts and see them as being impermanent, and you still don't see the complete right view. Okay, does that make sense? That's the higher schools. Lower schools say that is these three are the or without I should put this anyway, just visualize permanent there as well, okay? The lower schools, two lower schools will say if you realize the absence of independent existing, if you realize the absence of partless monolithic entities, and if you realize impermanence, you'll realize nature reality. The higher schools say that's not true. There's a more subtle wrong view. Okay, and that more subtle one is you can still see all those three, but you still see them as inherently existing. And I do have to change this slide at some point and put permanent there. Okay, that that is it. Okay,
Sorry, so
so
what is that? Sorry, may I ask, what is
yes,
that
what is it?
other, more subtle wrong view?
The view of it, things existing inherently. Yeah, what does that mean? Is that what you're asking?
No,
Or
no,
what you were just
no.
asking what it was? Yeah, that's
You
I
said the
think
higher school, I think I heard you say the higher schools say there is another
I
more
did
subtle wrong view.
I did say that. Yeah.
What
And
is
that
that?
more subtle wrong view is that we see things as inherently existing, meaning there's got to be something there that exists. And some of the other schools say, hey, well, you say that, then you're saying things don't exist. And they say, no, no, they just don't inherently exist. What they say, and this is getting very technical, okay, but it's okay. What they will say is that things exist, but things exist independence. Nothing has any inherent nature of its own. There is no inherent cup, mug. If you look for the mug, you cannot find it. And the lower schools say, yeah, we look through the mug by looking at its parts. And we look for the mug as it existing something independently out there. And we look for the mug as something that is impermanent. And we see all those things about the mug are true. We see its impermanence. We see all its parts. And this is in a meditative state, by the way. This is not conceptual. I mean, you start with conceptual. And we see let's see, we see it's not independent. We can generate that view, and that's a deep view, But we can have that view of a cup, of it not being existing independently, not existing, uh, well, existing with parts and existing as impermanent. And still, we will still believe there is a cup there. It's very subtle, but somewhere you can find a cup. The higher schools say that view that you hold, that there's still a cup, you're holding on to, there's something inherently existing as a cup. And there isn't. You will never find
Okay,
the cup.
thanks. Yeah.
You will never find the self. You will never find the jet airplane. You will never find the red car. Okay? This is advanced, this is very deep meditation, but that's what happens to the meditator. And why we need a meditation guide is we can get stuck thinking I mentioned this group a few weeks ago. I was sitting with one of my old friends and he told me he realized reality. He realized emptiness. And also, there are many warnings. Lama Zopa gave a lot of warnings to anybody who was meditating on Mahamudra and Dzogchen, saying that many of these people are meditating on space, thinking they're meditating on absence of inherent existence. And the meditation on space either leads to not a very good result. Feels good, but that doesn't lead, it's not outside of samsara. It's still ignorance, and eventually it'll wear off and we end up back where we were, or worse. Okay, I think we're just about out of time. Um,
Thank you.
Anything else you want to just ask or clarify?
Can I
It's
ask
very,
a quick
yeah, yeah,
clarification? When you say Madhyamika, is that the same as Madhyamika Prasangika? Is it exactly the same?
not
It
exactly.
is.
Well, it is exactly the same. Madhyamika or Madhyamaka does also have two traditions, and there's the Prasangika and the Svavantrika. And I won't go, I could, I'm not saying that in a proud way. I mean, I could explain to you the difference, but it wouldn't probably be very helpful. It's very subtle, very, very subtle. So just, yeah.
Okay.
So Madhyamika has two sort of sub trends or sub schools, the Prasangika and the Svatantrika. And it's just a question on a very subtle level how they define inherent existence. Yeah, basically. Okay, so next week's our last class? Or is this our last class? The next week, right? This one or next week? This one. Okay.
Sorry,
That's
can I
good.
just check? I joined thinking I was joining Be Around Therapist with Miffy.
Oh, yeah.
Did I just get the timing wrong, or was there a change? I'm not saying I'm absolutely delighted I did join. It's been very interesting.
Mhm. I don't know. I don't know when that's on.
Shall, did I just get the date wrong?
No, we didn't change. We didn't change.
All right, thank
Miffy,
you.
I think, is Tuesday. Yeah,
Tomorrow.
Tuesday.
Yes.
Tuesday.
So
All right.
you're on Tuesday, but it's our
I'm on
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Sorry.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Yes, it's our
Oh,
Tuesday,
right.
love.
Oh, that's what
Yes, thank
happened.
you. That's
So
what
Yeah.
it
just
was,
to
yes.
confirm, this was our last class, right?
I was going to just check one more time.
Yes, but I wish there was more.
We'll talk to Dundrup next Tuesday morning. Tuesday I leave for Nepal, so Monday night's hard would be, but we can do something in the future um, if you like to. But that's up to you guys and up to your guide, spiritual program coordinator. And we didn't even get to how to solve these things. You see, I didn't even talk about that. So
Can I
but
have one more question, please?
yes,
Yep. Which is, you talked about, well, getting it quite personal. All right. So I could deal with my upset towards certain people
uh-huh,
by recognizing that, I'm deluded.
right,
One of the sort of therapeutic ways that I also deal with it is thinking, okay, this is judgmental. They're deluded, but they actually have Buddha potential.
Sure.
They're just currently, muddled, and
You're
at
right.
some point they will sort themselves out.
Right.
And therefore, I'm inclined to feel that helps with my upset. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything wrong with that? How does
No,
that fit in?
no,
Okay,
no, no.
that's okay. All right.
Um,
What a
um,
relief.
no, not at all. In fact, the more you generate that thought, the more your compassion will grow too. Because they're just deluded, you can expand to the fact, well, what what happens to deluded people?
They suffer. Oh
That's right.
gosh. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, terribly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then you can always do that, it's fascinating that deluded person, whatever it is, that deluded person feels exactly the same as me. I mean, maybe someone's saying, what if, I mean, I might be called deluded by someone else, but I don't think I am, right? You know what I mean? And
yeah,
so the thing is that each person's in their universe thinking they're kind of right.
yeah,
And there is more right than other right, by the way. There is right and wrong, but and it's also it can be we can also say it's a gradation, right? Okay. So as we study more, we begin to, or meditate more, even begin to realize that everything everything generates a cause. And if you have a cause, there's going to be a result. That's one of the laws. We don't know when. And I shouldn't want to be that person. It's kind of like, oh, it's just for me. I remember uh I remember I was in Bodh Gaya and they have these, I don't know anymore, but there'd be all these pigs in the sewer, sewage and all that stuff. And it's just kind of disgusting. And I had this flash that there was someone who I was thinking of there that was really kind of not a very nice person and quite, I don't know, he was quite kind of a kind of a thief, kind of a cheater, and was getting away with it. And I thought maybe this is the kind of what were these pigs last lifetime? And if I saw that guy who cheated me in a few years, what, 10 years, 50 years, doesn't matter. He's in this incredible place in this sewer. It really it just softens everything, you know. It's because we see things as permanent, unchanging, that we have problems like that. Okay, good night. Good day.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Okay.
Thank you.
See you soon.